Hello there, Josh Cohen.
Hey, Glenn, how are you?
Doing well. Welcome to the Glenn Show, Josh. It's really good to be talking to you again at Blogging Heads.
Yeah.
How have you been?
Happy to be here with you.
Thank you. So you're Josh Cohen of Stanford University and Apple University?
Apple, and Boston Review.
Indeed, a formidable participant in the national dialogue is Boston Review. I'm so glad to be associated with it in even the modest way that I am. So congratulations on Boston Review,
Great
Josh.
to have you, yeah.
And I'm Glenn Loury of Brown University and Blogging Heads, and here we are, old friends and veterans of Blogging Heads, to have a chat about how our lives are going these days. Can we justify that, Josh? You think anybody's interested?
Well, I don't know. We're taking a chance with it, but, what
we really are. The comments may really light into us. These guys wasted 30 or 45 minutes of my time talking about themselves. Who cares? But anyway, Josh, I care.
Right? Yeah, I care.
Yeah, exactly.
We care. And we started the conversation back in, I guess it was back in December, and there was actually somebody who said that we should have picked it up again the last time we talked, so we can pick it up.
I noticed that comment, yeah. People want to know, they want to check in and find out how we're doing. So in December, I had only a couple of months before suffered the loss of my wife of 28 years, Linda Datcher Loury, and I had been diagnosed with and was beginning to be treated for prostate cancer. That was my litany of woes, and you too, right? I mean, the loss of your spouse.
I was several months into. At that point, I had a prostate cancer diagnosis a little over a year ago, back in June 2011. Then and it was a pretty aggressive prostate cancer. So I had surgery in July, and then started taking hormones in August. In fact, I went in to get pretty granular. I went in for my hormone shot yesterday. Continuing on that, and then also had radiation treatment November, December, into early January. The one part of the treatment that continues is the hormones,
which will go on for years, if I'm not mistaken.
Which will go on for at least another year, and
I see.
Who knows? Maybe it'll go on.
Play by ear.
One of the doctors I talked to said, longevity has its place. So
that's a famous Martin Luther King Jr. quote.
Yeah, it is. And,
it definitely has its place.
It has its place. So I was kind of agreeing with him about that. And things are, things are going fine as far as I can tell.
So you tolerated those treatments pretty well?
Yeah.
I mean, both the radiation and the hormone therapy?
Yeah, the radiation. I mean, we talked about the radiation. I thought that was, it was an annoyance because I had to go into the hospital every day for 7 weeks, 5 days a week for, the short treatment. But physically it wasn't a problem. And, the one really notable effect of there are two notable effects. One is, and people who are watching this will have some amusement from this. I have gotten a little bit of more hair on the top of my head. You can't really see it right now, but when I go to the barber, she takes care of the little. But the main thing the main noticeable effect is that you get hot flashes. And really, I'd say it's about every hour. I get one of, and I start perspiring, but half of humanity lives with hot flashes for a while, so I can happily join them. And I haven't otherwise had any difficulty with the treatment. And then you, beyond that, I just have to live with the uncertainty, because what remains uncertain is whether there's any prostate cancer left someplace in my body. tests have limits of detection, and nothing is showing up. But there's a pretty decent chance that there still is, and so who knows? I'll find out in the fullness of time. And you, where are you?
Well, I'll come to that. I just want to ask you, the recurrence would be detected by an increase in the PSA count. That's the prostate-specific antigen, which can be tested for in the bloodstream.
That's right.
And if it were to spike or to go up, that would be the indication that there were active cancerous cells elsewhere in the body that needed to be, that you had to be counted somehow.
So right now, when I take the test, the levels are beneath the level of detection of the test, which is good. That's where we want them to be. But that just means, for all I know, they're zero. I mean, it's just completely gone, or there could be something around, and then if it shows up, and I did also just have the test done again yesterday, so I'll know in a few days where I am on that. It's just there's an irreducible uncertainty about where things are from the God's eye point of view, and that's where we are. Yeah.
Well, we're wishing you the best, Josh. Sounds like a long slog.
Yeah.
You had surgery and radiation and chemotherapy?
No chemo, no, just radiation.
No chemotherapy.
No
okay.
chemo,
You had surgery, radiation, and the hormone therapy. So, yeah.
And I
have been.
I just to say, I have been keeping up a regular schedule. We'll get to this. I was in Nairobi 2 weeks ago, and in England giving some lectures in May, and in Nairobi also in March, and southern China in February. So, I've been working a regular schedule, doing the usual stuff. We've put out, 6 issues of Boston Review since during the course of this process. So I've, fully embraced all the things that I do with, great, enthusiasm, but hoping that can continue. Anyway, sorry I interrupted you.
That's all right. That was worth hearing. No, I was just going to give my own report. Also diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2011, and began treatment, radiation treatment. I had 39 of these short, 5 or 10 minute exposures 5 times a week for nearly 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was asked to take this injection, Lupron, and this oral medication that would suppress the level of testosterone in my body and keep it down near zero for for a period of time. And I was on that for 6 months. And in fact, I just saw my doctor recently, and I was relieved of this regimen of enforced low testosterone. He said that the study showed that continuing for 3 years relative to going for 6 months for a case like mine added only the smallest measurable incremental benefit to the survival probabilities and such, and that he didn't think it was necessary for me to continue, especially given that the side effects which you mentioned, hot flashes, and I have them, but also absent libido, which I just assume it not be absent. I hope I can be forgiven that.
Well, that's my situation. I'm taking Lupron, and the purpose of Lupron, we're getting granular here, but so be it. The purpose of Lupron is to deprive prostate cancer of the fuel that spreads it, and the fuel that spreads it is testosterone. And so the goal is to drive the testosterone down as close to zero. And then so I feel like I'm, it's like running an experiment on my personality to decide whether my, aggressive assholishness is driven by testosterone or, is independent, and it looks
it's a natural experiment.
So far, it seems to be. My conclusion is that once you've developed a certain kind of personality and character, maybe
it just carries over.
You don't need the testosterone to keep it going.
Prostate cancer may need a fuel, but the aggressiveness doesn't need a fuel anymore.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's enough about prostate cancer, Josh. But I did want to just comment briefly on the other aspect of my earlier travail, which was, being deprived of the loving companionship and comfort and close relationship of my dear wife and the mother of my children.
Yeah.
And not to go on too long about it, but just to say, I haven't even begun to fathom the magnitude of the loss, or maybe I'm only just beginning to fathom it. I mean, one could write a book about this. I'm sure those books have been written, about grief and about loss and all of that. Yeah. And our family, myself and our two sons, Glenn the second and Nehemiah, who survived their mother's death, we're still reeling and we're still kind of fumbling in the dark, and we don't really know what we're doing or exactly how we're going forward. We have a lot of support. We are in it together. We somehow know it's going to be all right in the end, but here we are, and it's almost a year. It'll be a year in 5 or 6 weeks, and we're still kind of, at least I know I feel very unsettled, very much kind of sleepwalking, just kind of in a fog, kind of carrying on, but not really sort of grasping the essence of what my life is now, because it's been so profoundly dislocated and disrupted. Yeah. I mean, this house that I live in, this beautiful house that Linda and I made together here, it feels like a mausoleum or I don't know, a museum or something, and I just kind of wander the rooms, Yeah. I go into her office and, go through things I've still not dealt with, or clothing, or, and I could go on about this, and I don't want to bore people, but just to try to describe it as this, indescribable challenge, because normalcy, kind of getting on with it, moving forward. I mean, I feel like I want to do it, but I can't. And I guess I just have to sit with it until the time has passed. Yeah.
And it must have been particularly difficult when you were going through your own, health situation, the prostate cancer, the diagnosis and treatment, and not to have her companionship for that, her support and love and attention. And I know for me, my life has been, just unbelievable through the, through what could otherwise have been a much more difficult and trying experience. You're going through it together makes a big difference. So it must have been particularly trying for you. I'm sorry about that.
All I can say is you're right.
Yeah.
And I can say that I was not completely alone, and that I had some close friends who stepped up and tried to be much more supportive than the character of our friendship would have otherwise, warranted or led one to expect. And so I've been very grateful for the support, the love, the kindness, and generosity that people have shown me. But sure, sure, it would have been much better in going through this ordeal that Linda had been there to, sort of, to help me, to lean on, to support, encourage, to just be there with me. But the other thing I think is, I only got prostate cancer.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she had metastatic breast cancer. It got to the stage where it was in her liver and it was in her brain, and then she knew that she was going to die, you know, years before she actually died, and then she died a not at all pleasant death. I mean, not terribly painful, but it was tough.
Yeah.
Okay. And, you know, if this thing kills me, it'll be 20 years from now by the time it catches up with me, and the chances are it won't kill me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, my case is probably certainly not as aggressive as you've described yours as having been.
Yeah.
You know, let me knock on wood somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, inshallah is what I want to say. I don't want to tempt fate on this,
Right.
You know, my odds don't look that bad, so I feel like lucky. You know.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that if it could have only been one of us there to support the other, that I was available to be there to support her, because she certainly needed it a good deal more than I have needed it, even though I have missed her. I have missed her. But okay, let's move on, John. John, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I don't mind being confused with John. There's worse company to be put in than that's good company.
Let's talk about Nairobi.
Yeah.
I mean, I got an amazing report from you about your activities working with folks on the ground over there in Kenya.
Yeah.
On various issues and whatnot, and what an experience and what an amazing thing. And, you know,
great.
I just love to hear your relatively concise report and observations on your experience in Africa this summer.
Well, as you know, conciseness is a challenge for me, but let me see I'll see what I can do. I'll see if I can step up.
Okay.
So I've been, for the past 3 years, teaching a course at Stanford in the D School, the Institute of Design. The course carries the incredibly pretentious title, Designing Liberation Technologies. And the basic idea, I teach it with a couple of people. All along I've taught it with a guy in computer science named Terry Winograd, who runs the Human-Computer Interaction program at Stanford. And the design school is founded on a philosophy called human-centered design or user-centered design. And the idea is that when you're doing design, which really means solving a problem, it's design in a very general sense, that you should platform the innovative problem-solving enterprise on a kind of an engagement with users, and in a kind of an ethnographic spirit, thus the term user-centered or human-centered design. So instead of saying, hey, here's a great technology, let me see if I can find some way to use it, you start by trying to understand something about users and in a creative way understanding something about the needs of users, and then we do encourage students in the course to come up with mobile solutions to problems, and we work in some informal settlements in Nairobi. So,
what do you mean by mobile solutions?
Mobile phones. Using mobile phones. So here, the basic premise of the course is you work in these informal settlements, Kibera, Mathare, and some other informal settlements in Nairobi. You have very large numbers of people, say 150,000 to 200,000 people, 75% living below the poverty line, with all the Kenyan poverty line, with all the challenges that come with that. At the same time, you've got roughly 90% mobile phone penetration in those neighborhoods. And we're not talking about smartphones, we're talking about low-end Nokia phones, but still, 90%. So the premise of the course is that there are some ways that you can use mobile technology to get a leg up in addressing some of the challenges that people living in those settlements face. And what we do is we identify organizations that work in the Kenyan organizations that work in the informal settlement. So an organization, for example, called Umande Trust, which works on water and sanitation in Kibera, has been around for 20 years or something like that. And we partner some of the design teams. These are graduate student teams in the course. Partner with that organization to define interesting challenges that are worth addressing, and then in the course of, it's a short amount of time, a 10-week course, get to a first prototype of a solution to the problem. And then
you had students from Stanford with you while you were over there in these informal settlements?
In March, before the course started, Terry Winograd and I were there, and there were 6 students with us who were doing the need finding for the course. There were 23 students in the course. While I was there, so there were 6 project teams in the course. The course is over now, and they don't have to do anything more, but 4 of the teams are continuing to work on their projects. And there were 4 students when I was there who, from 2 different project teams, who were spending their time in particularly the Gatwakera village in Kibera, working on trying to improve the financials of these biocenters that have been built by Umande Trust, which basically pay toilets and pay showers and meeting spaces that are run by the community. And then another group that's working with an access to justice program of the same organization, Umande Trust. And what they try to do is to help informal traders in markets in Kibera who are getting harassed by the police use their mobile phones to send a message to paralegals who work at Umande Trust and to other. It's like a 911 system where you can send a message to a whole bunch of people fast to say, there's a problem that you're having, and you don't just disappear and your stuff gets stolen or something like that. So they were there working on these things, yeah. And it was great. It was a fantastic trip. I've been there 5 times now in the last 2.5 years. I know a bunch of people. They're all kind of interesting and doing exciting stuff in a very, under challenging circumstances. But, the circumstances are challenging because, there's not much income and, there are no toilets around and like that. But there's a lot of energy in these areas.
You've been there 5 times.
Yeah.
In 2.5 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, the basic thing that you learn fast, it's an obvious truth in life, but it's certainly true here, is that the success of the work that we're doing depends more than anything else on relationships. It's all about relationships. And I didn't have to go, when I went 2 weeks ago, but, there are a bunch of people there who I like and we're working with, and if you don't preserve the relationships by going and spending some time together and talking and seeing, then the stuff doesn't work. So it's very relationship intensive, and that's another way in which it's incredibly rewarding, because you meet a bunch of new people and I like them and it's fun.
Yeah, what's your living arrangement when you're in Nairobi?
Oh, it varies from time to time, and frankly, this time I stayed in the Nairobi Hilton, which is not usually where I stay. There's a kind of apartment complex where people who are around visiting for a couple of weeks stay, and that's usually where I am. But complicated story, the details don't matter, but I ended up having to stay in the Nairobi Hilton, which was, it was okay, but yeah. It was a great trip, though, and the work is very, it was a great trip. I enjoy doing it, but I want to come back to one really fundamental point, which is we've been doing it for 2.5 years. We've got a lot of projects that are, starting up and going into pilot phases, and there's a lot of enthusiasm from the partner groups and enthusiasm from students, and but I want to be very clear about this. We haven't done a single bit of good for anybody yet. I mean, from a kind of outcome point of view. And, there's so much cheerleading that goes on in this area. Cheerleading of good intentions and cool ideas and bright innovations. And, as you know from, all the work that colleagues in economics have done the Poverty Action Lab and the Institute for Poverty Analysis, et cetera. At some point you got to say, did this improve anybody's life or not? And we are still, other than some very marginal things, we are still waiting to see if these projects are effective in the way that we would like them to be, to improve the functioning of the water market or the income of the biocenters, or the safety, security of personal documents for people, or better access to justice. They're all good ideas. There's a huge amount of energy and creativity and goodwill, et cetera, that goes into them. But jury's still entirely out from the point of view of impact on human well-being.
That is to say, the evaluation has yet to be completed, but the framework for an objective, empirical assessment, quantitative assessment of the impact of any of your program has been put in place, so results will be forthcoming in the fullness of time.
Yes, for about half of the projects that we've got going, there is part of the design of the project is to make sure that we have baseline measure, baseline kind of pre-treatment measures of, for example, time it takes for people to find water, quality of the water they find, or access to information about sexual health and information about sexual behaviors, and so we're some of the projects have been done by graduate students in political science who are basically trying to pursue the project partly as practical efforts to do some good, but also with a kind, a field experiment aspect to them. So, yeah, I'm hoping that I got into this because I was tired of hearing cheerleading, about bright ideas and cool ideas and good intentions, and that really weren't delivering anything. And so I don't want to go in. I don't want to go in for that myself, although I know the temptations to do it. So I think there's a lot of promise in some of the stuff that we're doing, but we'll see if in the fullness of time whether it delivers on that promise. And you were in.
I was
traveling.
in Nepal. I made 2 trips abroad this summer. In June, I went to Korea to give a series of lectures and was there for a week. And then last month, I traveled to Kathmandu, Nepal, to a conference on the worldwide experience with affirmative action policies and how those experiences might be informative to a constituent assembly which is drafting a new constitution for the newly democratic nation of Nepal after years of left-wing insurgency, Maoist-inspired insurgency that had created quite a disruption, a near civil war condition in the country, and then a settlement between the violent insurgent forces and the government, which led to the Hindu monarchy abdicating, and a election being held to elect members of a representative body that's going to draft a constitution. In the aftermath of that traumatic and dramatic political change, the intellectual and political classes in Nepal are contemplating what role quota, set aside, guaranteed seats in the legislature, protection of minority language rights, employment, seats in the higher education, local autonomy for certain kind of, civil undertakings. They're even talking about ethnic federalism as they contemplate the design of their new democratic institutions. All of this kind of talk is in the air over there, and so some universities and foundations and NGOs banded together to call this big conference and invite people from the U.S. and UK and India, especially from India. And other places to come and talk about it. So that's what I was doing, and I've talked here on Blogging Heads before about the substance of some of those presentations and these ideas about affirmative action. I can also say that I had an amazing experience being in this South Asian city of 5 million, this bustling metropolis in the developing world of Hindu and Buddhist, nestled at the foothills of the Himalayas, with this tremendous cultural heritage, these temples and monuments that I saw, these amazingly beautiful things that I saw. At almost every turn in the city. I mean, I went to 3 different districts in the city that had 3 completely different complexes of, beautiful old structures and Buddhist and Hindu holy sites sitting side by side, one in the shadow of the other, and so on. And just culturally, it was interesting. Travel broadens. I think that's the aphorism. And
so, putting aside the details of the conferences and the papers which you've talked about before, what was the? We're making this is our personal reflections show. What did you personally get from the experience of being there, or the combination of the experiences of being in Korea?
Well, let me talk about Nepal for a minute at a personal level. I mean, I'm thinking of 2 meetings that had a really big impact on me. One of them was with Purna Nepali. That's the man's name, Purna Nepali. And he is a Dalit, that is of the low caste, the untouchable caste. He is the 7th PhD of the Dalit caste origin in the history of the country. Okay, so he's counting, and he knows that he's number 7. There are only 7, or there were only 7 when he got his PhD, and he knows that he's only 7. And he talked and he's doing interviews in a village in the east of the country. He was talking about caste, and we sat for 3 hours one afternoon, and he just regaled me with one story after another, an anecdote, an insight, and I asked questions and so on about how, quote, the caste system, close quote, that is the inherited cultural practice of social stratification associated with occupational differentiation. It has certain tasks, certain kinds of work deemed unclean and polluting, and then the people who do that work, and then their children, and then this kind of hereditary caste-like designation gets created and then gets reinforced on it. So I learned a great deal from him. Maybe that's not a personal experience as much as it's just reporting of a memorable encounter or whatever. And then the other was...
if I could just ask, how did, with the caste restrictions, et cetera, how did he manage to get a PhD? I mean, I'm expressing my mind-numbing ignorance about, how...
He got to Kathmandu University. Now, I don't know the whole story. I didn't ask him in a lot of detail about, what the travails were. He volunteered some of that. And he got himself in a program that was joint between the university and a Swiss university. So his PhD is from this joint program. The Kathmandu University is, and that was going to be the other meeting that I was going to mention, because I met with the vice chancellor and the dean. And vice chancellor is like the president of the university. And the dean. And the Kathmandu University, which is 20 years old, is a kind of upstart institution of higher education created by some ambitious people who love their country and who wanted an institution that would be relatively free of the kind of political morass in which the largest university in Nepal, I can't remember the name of it, it's TU, and so the first initial is T, but I don't remember the name of the university, but it has 300,000 students. And it's not like one can't get an education there, but let's just say it's not the best run institution of higher education on the planet. Okay, a long way from it. So the vice chancellor at Kathmandu University began the university 20 years ago when he was a much younger man, having earned his PhD in chemistry at Cornell University and having walked away from a lab and an academic career in the United States in order to return to Nepal and begin to try to create this institution. And I met the people who were working in this institution, and they were really devoted and serious people and quite impressive people. And I thought, what an amazing thing that a person just out of will, he and some compatriots, try to improve the institutional climate in the country by creating something new in the face of what might just have seemed to be overwhelming obstacles. And indeed, I was so impressed by the intensity of intellectual interest in the deliberations of this conference, because it was an academic conference. People presenting papers and talking about their books and the research that they'd done. Some of it was quantitative, most of it was qualitative. I would say anthropologists were more numerous than economists at this conference. But it was an academic conference, and yet every session was packed. And when they opened it to the public and politicians came in, they came seriously, and after their speechifying, they did speechify. Yeah. But after, they sat and they listened.
Wow.
They stayed late and they listened to the level of the discourse was very high.
Yeah.
The conversations were conducted in English, and the quality, I hope I don't sound snobbish in saying this, I went not expecting it. I went not expecting something quite as sophisticated as what I found.
Yeah.
Was very, very high. So I thought, the world is a small place, and just because a country is poor doesn't mean that its people are not, culturally in tune with, the best that's being written and thought about some of the most important questions of our time. I mean, there was a lot of political theory and political philosophy at that conference. I felt a little bit like, I'm sitting around with Madison and Adams and so forth as they try to puzzle out, what the U.S., because the leadership classes of the Nepal population now are doing exactly that. They're puzzling out the framework for their going forward for the next few generations.
And did you feel like you wish there was something more like that in our own country, more of a serious public discussion about important issues with large questions of political philosophy on the table in conversations in which public figures were taking those questions seriously? Or you think we got a lot of that already?
I mean, you're putting those words in my mouth, Josh, but I don't mind, because I might well have said them myself without your prompting. Yeah. I agree with the sentiment that I in contrast, missed, when I think about our own, the character of our own public discourse about fundamental questions, like it suffices in a political campaign to call your opponent a socialist or a rich guy, and then you're done.
Yeah.
And then you're done. And then you go to your focus group and you see which way the needle moves. And then you pour another $50 million behind pushing the needle in that direction, and then you're done. So the vacuousness and, kind of fecklessness of our political deliberations does contrast sharply with the vitality in the sense of urgency and also the kind of acute intellectual engagement in the discourse that I saw there. But I don't want to paint too rosy a picture. I mean, those Maoist insurgents are Maoist insurgents.
Yeah.
There's three different flavors of the Communist Party in Nepal. They have Communist Party, and then they have in parentheses some initials to indicate which branch. There's a Marxist-Leninist branch of the Communist Party. There's a Maoist A and a Maoist B branch of the Communist Party. I don't know what the A and B's, what they differ about, but and it felt a lot like I was reminded of some of the sort of dreamy utopian rhetoric of the 1960s that I experienced when I was coming along as a young college student and whatnot during the heyday of Black Power and anti-Vietnam and sort of Black nationalist assertion. Because a lot of the stuff that people were saying, when I thought about it for a minute, didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Kids have a right to be educated in their native tongue. Well, their native tongue, because they live in a village up in the foothills of the Himalayas, is spoken by 100,000 people. there's a national language of Nepal, potentially, but it happens to have been spoken by the upper caste Hindu-dominant classes, and it is a kind of Hindi-related dialect that the lower caste and the tribal Aboriginal, I don't call them Aboriginal, they call them indigenous groups in Nepal don't speak and don't relate to. So they're talking about language policy in ways that I said, well, geez, this is the 21st century. Mm-hmm. You're a small country here. What are these people going to do for a living?
Yeah.
Do you really want to educate your kids in their quote-unquote native tongue, or at least to the extent that it impairs their ability to master, not to say English. I mean, we're not even talking about English.
Yeah.
And ethnic federalism. They're going to create cantons based upon these. You want to reify those ethnic differences, do you?
Yeah.
You want to build them right into the foundation cornerstone of your state? Are you sure you want to do that?
Yeah.
I thought, man, but I couldn't say anything, I'm an outsider. It would have been way politically incorrect for me to have a strong opinion about it. I don't know enough to have an opinion.
Yeah.
But I thought, I'm not sure. I'm glad that there are thinking people in the room and that the questions are being bandied about, but there are a lot of sort of emotive. There's a lot of powerful emotive sentiment in here that is pushing in a way that I'm not sure is right.
Yeah, but it's good to have the questions raised and know what
Indeed.
The answer is it's crazy to educate kids in their native tongue when the native tongue is spoken by 100,000 people or 50,000, very small numbers, and there's some. It's not. It may be crazy to do that, but there's a kind of powerful animating idea that leads people to think that and say that, and so to know what's wrong with it, assuming it is wrong, to know what's wrong with it. I mean, we've had these the political theory version of these debates. It's work by Will Kimlicka has played a very important role in kindling those debates. And about minority languages, for example, I think it's.
I just read a brilliant essay by Nancy Fraser. Do you know her work? She's at the New School.
Yeah.
On what does she call it?
Redistribution and recognition.
Yeah, that's it. Redistribution or recognition. Yeah. That's she has an essay, and there's another guy with an essay. I was very impressed by her essay.
Yeah, that's a really terrific line of work that she's done. So I think. If you have an open, if people are entertaining serious ideas, then there are going to be some people who are going to say some stuff that's sort of off the wall, and that's good. That's, maybe it's not good if it gets implemented, but it's good that that people feel, that there's an open conversation about it, and you hope that the more off the wall ideas get answered, as opposed to the current situation of political discourse in our own country is really pathetic. I mean, maybe it's partly it always looks rosier in the past, and maybe it always looks rosier elsewhere, and it's also the dog days of August, but
it's horrible, man. I mean, I know we got to go soon. We're talking about the sorry state of political discourse, and I'm thinking about just this last week, two, brouhahas that have crept up. I mean, one of them is this Romney Bain Capital. They closed down the company. The guy's wife. She's got cancer. He loses his job. There's no insurance, and she dies.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that becomes fodder for a political ad about Romney's unfitness to be president. And it made my heart sink. I mean, I'm not getting into the weeds about what the details are about the allegations and the legitimacy of it just made my heart sink that was the level of the discourse. And then the other thing is Mitt Romney's trying to refight the 1990s welfare reform wars.
Ridiculous. Two things about it. Number one, on that one, refight it by just out and out lying about what the Obama I mean, this is, people keep talking about this kind of post-truth. I mean, it's just disgraceful. The other thing that happened, though, with just on the Bain Capital, and the guy loses his job, the wife, terrible, sad story. Doesn't have health care. Romney doesn't care about this, doesn't pay any attention to this. Well, when I think it was Andrea Saul, Romney's spokeswoman, says, if he had been in Massachusetts,
I saw that,
would have had health care, and then a bunch of conservatives say this could be the moment that Romney lost the election. I mean, what kind of complete Looney Tunes is it when somebody says something that's true?
No, I get that. I mean, what they're saying is a tactical opportunity was lost. I mean, lost the election is probably an overstatement.
Yeah.
A tactical opportunity was lost. Instead of buying the premise of this political attack on candidate Romney, and then trying to temper it by saying, but this person would have been okay under Romney care in Massachusetts, they should have, these conservative critics, the Romney campaign should have seized on the opportunity to say what a sleazy line of political argument this is.
Yeah.
A guy loses his job. His wife dies of breast cancer. There's a tragedy. There's no doubt about it. That's the fault of Mitt Romney?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's just, it's beneath demagoguery. My wife died of breast cancer.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking about me, Glenn Loury, personally.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got as much sympathy as the next fellow for someone who suffers that loss. But to use that and attribute that as the responsibility, I mean, that's just, to a political candidate, I mean, there are 3 degrees of causal remove here, and there are questions at every step. I mean, anyway, so I think that's what the conservatives were objecting to, that it was a tactical mistake to respond to that by embracing its premises and then calling attention to the fact that Romney had. Plus, it tempers Romney's attack on Obamacare, which I guess is their other point.
Right. No, that I think is. I'm focusing on that. I think it was an important point that they were making. That this was somebody from Romney's campaign advertising the thing that everybody's trying to hide under the bushel basket. But I agree with you. The level of vacuousness and lying, it's painful to watch. And then when you have an experience like the one that you described, where people are taking serious issues seriously, it makes the local experience that much more painful. Can I just say one thing, Josh? I know you got to go. Go
okay. The one thing is, what I see in common with both of these political attacks, the one by the president's campaign on Romney, it's Romney's fault that this man's wife is dead from cancer, and the one by the Romney campaign on the president, which is basically he's the food stamp president, he's trying to undo welfare reform or whatever, is that they are both ad hominem.
Yes,
they are both, and not only are they negative, but they are both premised on the idea that the way to win the election, and Lord knows what kind of mandate you're going to have if you win an election this way, is to make the other person seem to be this, he's not a regular guy, he's a rich guy, he doesn't understand people like us, or darkly, he's in tune with the criminals, the welfare cheats, and the underclass, the whole thing that you've been trying to get away from for the last 50 years. And he's secretly in league with them. He wants to create a kind of country where they don't have to work and they can just, suck on the welfare tip.
Problem is,
and that's just horrible political deliberation. I mean, it's not deliberation at all.
It's not deliberation at all.
And it makes idiots out of the voters. It makes it like we're all like these automata who will move this way or that based on on the buttons that they're pushing on us.
It's terrible, and I agree with you. It's insulting, but here's the dilemma. Dilemma is when you've got persisting employment running over 8%. It's kind of hard to run on your record. And when on the other side, when the principal achievement that you've got is that you were governor of Massachusetts and got through universal health care coverage, and you can't say anything about that, then all you've got to run on is the other guy is an asshole, because you can't run on your own accomplishments. Obama, it's hard for him to run on his record, but he's been running a little bit more on the health care stuff since the Supreme Court decision, and Romney's running away from his record. So I think the ad hominem character, the insulting to everybody's intelligence and ad hominem character of the campaign is really driven by that fundamental reality that they have to run away from the things they've really done. On that happy note.
Yeah, on that happy note, Josh, we're done for today. We'll have another conversation sometime in the near future. Good to talk to you.
Look forward to that. Okay, good to talk to you.
Take care.